I'd been away for 6 years, but Cold Haven still felt like the place I never quite fit. Not that I ever really fit anywhere, but something about returning to your hometown after so long, especially under these circumstances, makes you realize how small the world actually is. The drive from the airport was quiet, save for the occasional gust of wind that swept across the roads, like the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to leave again. But I wasn't planning on that. I had to bury my mother. I pulled up to the old house, my mother's house, now sitting too quiet behind the iron gates. The house was bigger than I remembered, though time had done its damage. The stone pathway cracked, the once pristine hedges a little wild, but the porch light still flickered every evening and the mail still piled up. It was a strange kind of alive, like it had been waiting for me. I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching against the gravel driveway, my breath hitching in my throat. This was it. The thing I had been avoiding for all these years, the moment I would have to face it, face them. My sister Miranda was already there when I walked in through the front door. She didn't even bother to turn around when I entered, too busy smoothing the folds of her dress as she stood in front of the mirror, making sure every strand of her hair was in place. Always dressed to impress. The reflection staring back at me looked as polished as ever, wearing that smile that could charm anyone who didn't know her. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," she said, her voice cool, with just the slightest hint of a smirk. "I didn't come for you," I replied, my own voice sharper than I expected. Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, then back to the mirror. "Well, you're here now. Just don't make it weird, okay? This isn't about you." I blinked at her. "I'm here because Mom's dead, Miranda. It's kind of about me." She let out a long sigh as though I'd asked her to solve an impossible equation. "I know, but Mom's gone and we have to take care of things. Just don't make it uncomfortable for anyone." My stomach churned. Uncomfortable. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this town, not in this house, certainly not in her life. There was a time when I would have let it slide, when I would have nodded and moved on. But now, after all these years, I wasn't about to let Miranda dictate how this played out. Not anymore. I forced a breath through my nose, willing myself to stay calm. "I'm not here to cause problems. I'm just here to bury Mom and be done with it." Her lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Good. That's all anyone wants." The silence between us was thick, heavier than I remembered. I glanced around, taking in the familiar surroundings, the family portraits on the walls, the same curtains that used to be in every window. This was my childhood, my life. And yet, in this moment, it felt more like a stranger's home. I wasn't just facing Miranda. I was facing the past that had been deliberately erased in ways that I was just beginning to understand. I turned away from her and headed toward the back of the house. The memorial was in the next room, a few familiar faces I barely recognized. I could hear the murmurs of the small crowd already gathered. When I entered, the atmosphere shifted. The chatter died off. All eyes turned toward me, though no one said a word. The air in the room was thick with something unspoken. It wasn't just grief, it was avoidance. I scanned the room, letting my gaze fall on the table, covered with flowers. My mother's favorite ones, though I wasn't sure anyone remembered that anymore. The rest of the room was filled with a few well-dressed strangers and familiar faces that couldn't meet my eyes. And then there it was, a name on a plaque that nearly made my blood boil. It was an award that my old team had worked tirelessly for, the one we deserved, the one I had earned, but it had been given to someone else, someone who had betrayed us. The name on that plaque wasn't mine. It was the name of a former colleague, the one who'd thrown us under the bus to save his own skin, the one who'd claimed credit for the work we'd done. My hands tightened around the back of a chair, my fingers digging into the wood. "That's supposed to be mine," I muttered under my breath. Miranda's voice cut through the silence, sharp and dismissive. "Not everything has to be about your work, Elise." I looked at her, but she wasn't looking at me. She had her back to me, her posture perfect, her face lit up with that plastic smile she reserved for this town. The town that made her, the town that owned her. I almost wanted to laugh, but instead the words came out in a whisper. "You've been a part of this too. You've kept it all hidden, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." She turned just enough to catch my eye, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. "You should have stayed gone." I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to take a step back. "I was gone. For a reason. Miranda's gaze didn't soften. Well, now you're back. Just don't make it worse for yourself. But it was already worse. And as I stood there staring at the plaque that wasn't mine, I realized something. My mother, Miranda, the town, they had all conspired in silence. They'd erased me from their history, and now they expected me to accept it. But I wasn't going to. This was just the beginning. The old house smelled the same, a mix of stale coffee, dust, and something faintly floral that I could never quite place. My childhood home, now a relic of a time I'd tried to leave behind, stood as a shrine to my mother's political career. The walls were lined with awards and framed photographs of her with some of the town's elite, though I didn't remember her ever being the one to care much about the recognition. Her reputation was built on hard work, or at least that's what she always told me. It was a far cry from the woman who had barely been around to raise me, leaving me to figure out life mostly on my own. And now, here I was, standing in the heart of that life, surrounded by the echoes of a past that no longer seemed to belong to me. Miranda was busy organizing everything, just as she had been when we were kids. The same meticulous attention to detail, the same perfect, curated exterior. She was the picture of composure, even in the face of our mother's death. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. The candles, the pictures, the framed articles about our mother's career as a political fundraiser, each one seemed to tell a different story, one I wasn't a part of. Everything looks great, doesn't it? Miranda said, her voice a little too bright as she fussed with a vase. She never looked up from her task, too focused on the perfection of the moment. Yeah, it's perfect, I replied, my tone flat, almost sarcastic. I didn't mean to sound that way, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. Miranda didn't seem to notice. She stepped back, hands on her hips, admiring the room with a satisfied smile. You know, Mom would have loved to see everything come together like this. She worked so hard to make sure people remembered her. I couldn't stop myself from responding. Yeah, she worked hard at making sure everyone remembered her, but not at actually being a mother. The smile faltered on Miranda's face, but she quickly covered it. Don't start, Elise, not now. This is about Mom, not about us. I bit my lip, trying to keep my frustration in check. Of course, it was always about Mom. Always about the public persona, the perfect image, never about the truth. I turned away and walked further into the house, into the study where I had spent hours growing up, doing my homework, pretending to care about the things my mother valued. She had filled that room with political artifacts, photos, press clippings, old campaign pamphlets, as if her life's work could be distilled into a few neat files. I sat down at the desk and ran my hand across the smooth wood. There, in the back corner, was a drawer that I had always been told not to touch. But now, with my mother gone and everything feeling like it was coming apart, I pulled it open. The drawer was filled with old papers, mostly documents I didn't recognize. But there, at the very bottom, was an encrypted laptop. The one I had used when I worked for the Treasury Division. The one that had been wiped clean when my career was erased. I hadn't seen it in years. My heart skipped in my chest as I pulled it out, feeling the weight of it, and the weight of everything that had happened since I'd been pushed out. Miranda? I called, my voice steady but tight with the realization of what this meant. She appeared in the doorway almost instantly, her eyes narrowing as she caught sight of the laptop in my hands. What are you doing with that? She asked, her voice cold, guarded. I raised my eyebrows, meeting her gaze. What's this? The evidence of what you've erased? What we've all been erasing? She stepped into the room, her face unreadable. It's nothing, just something old. Don't make this harder than it already is. I didn't take my eyes off the laptop. You've been cleaning up, haven't you? Scrubbing away everything that didn't fit with your perfect life? Starting with me. Miranda sighed, but there was no anger in her voice, just that practiced, detached calm she'd perfected over the years. Elise, please, this isn't the time. I'm not asking for a fight, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I'm asking for the truth. She paused, glancing at the laptop in my hands and then back at me. What truth are you looking for exactly? The one where you were erased from all of it? I stood, clutching the laptop tightly. The truth about everything. About what happened with the Treasury, about how you and Mom worked together to cover it all up. Miranda's expression hardened, and I saw the mask slip for a moment, the tiniest crack in her carefully crafted facade. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. You think I've been a part of this? She said, her voice low, almost too controlled. You think I had anything to do with what happened to you? I nodded slowly, swallowing the anger rising in my chest. You were always the good daughter, the perfect one. So, yes, I think you've been complicit in this. I think you've been hiding it for years. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. You have no idea what you're talking about. You think this is easy for me? You think it was easy to stand by and watch you tear yourself apart? To watch mom tear you apart? My heart skipped. You knew? She nodded, looking away. I didn't have a choice. I was doing what I had to do to survive, Elise. You don't understand. I stood there stunned. You're telling me that you knew and did nothing? I did what I could, she said, her voice breaking, but I wasn't strong enough to stop it. The weight of her words hung in the air. I wasn't sure what to say. All I could feel was the hollow ache of betrayal. This wasn't just about a job. It wasn't just about a career erased. This was about me, the person they had turned their backs on. I turned away, the laptop still in my hands, as if it could somehow hold the answers I was looking for, but it didn't. It couldn't. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, I said quietly, finally meeting her gaze one last time. I just want the truth. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I knew what I had to do next. As I walked out of the room, the weight of the past pressing down on my chest, I didn't look back. The Cold Haven Public Records building wasn't much to look at. An old brick building tucked behind a row of stores that hadn't seen a new coat of paint in decades. The windows were small, the door creaked when you opened it, and the air inside had that musty, old paper smell, the kind that seemed to stick to the walls. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a harsh, artificial glow over everything. It was the kind of place people walked past without a second thought, without ever wondering what kind of history it held within its walls. I had thought for a moment that the records might be kept elsewhere, maybe a more secure location, one where a place like this wouldn't be trusted with something as important as my career. But when the building had been built in the 70s, there was no reason to think it would ever be a museum of erased histories. Now, it seemed like exactly the place where my history could disappear without a trace. I walked to the front desk, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. A woman in her mid-50s with gray hair tied up in a loose bun sat behind the counter. She looked up from her paperwork with the kind of weary politeness people reserved for routine tasks. Her name tag read Marla, and her glasses rested low on her nose as she adjusted them to peer at me. "Can I help you?" she asked, the question seeming almost rehearsed. "I'm looking for records," I said, pushing the words out with a practiced calm I didn't feel. "Something related to the Treasury Division, my division, the one that was disbanded a few years ago." She blinked, her brow furrowing slightly. "We don't usually keep records for federal agencies," she said slowly. "You might want to try the state office in Riverton. They keep, well, a different kind of record. I'm talking about a local division. Cold Haven had a covert branch." I leaned in, lowering my voice so the few people scattered around the room couldn't overhear. "It was a forensic accounting division. It was dissolved after a scandal, but there should still be some kind of record." Her face softened just slightly, like I'd said something she didn't want to hear. She looked at me with the kind of sympathy that people usually reserve for those they didn't want to engage with. "I'm afraid I've never heard of such a division. You're sure it was Cold Haven?" I felt my chest tighten. I didn't want to get into it with her. She was just doing her job. But something about her dismissiveness made my hands clench into fists. "It's not like it was public knowledge," I said, my tone sharp. "But I was part of that division. My name was on the documents before they scrubbed it. I've come to find what I can." She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "We keep basic records. There's no guarantee it'll be here. But I'll look." I watched her type in the query, her fingers hovering over the keys for longer than they needed to. Her face didn't change, but I could see the way she stiffened, the way her gaze flickered toward the back room. She seemed to be thinking, running a mental checklist, calculating whether or not to tell me to leave. But then, as though deciding it was easier to comply than challenge me, she nodded. "All right, I'll check the files in the back. Wait here." I nodded, leaning back against the dusty counter and crossing my arms. I didn't trust her. Something about the way she moved, like she knew something I didn't, unsettled me. There was no reason to act like this was some great secret, no reason to treat my inquiry like I was asking for something absurd. This was public information, wasn't it? Minutes passed, the silence growing heavy, until finally she returned with a folder in her hands. She laid it on the counter with an air of finality, like the matter had been settled. I reached for it slowly, not bothering to thank her. But as I opened it, my stomach dropped. The contents were nothing. Blank pages, empty files, and forms that had been hastily photocopied. A mix of irrelevant documents that didn't even pertain to what I was looking for. There wasn't a single mention of my division, my team, or the work we had done. I looked up at her, frustration boiling over. "This is it?" She was already turning away. Like I said, if it wasn't here, it's likely been archived elsewhere. You should. Don't lie to me, I interrupted, my voice more biting than I intended. She stiffened, but she didn't turn back around. "You're telling me there's nothing about an entire division that worked here in Coldhaven? Nothing that could link me to it?" Her back was to me now, her shoulders tense. She didn't answer immediately, and that was when I knew. I knew she was hiding something. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, her voice low, almost inaudible, as she pushed the folder back to me. "I'll be the judge of that," I said, shoving the folder aside. "You don't get to lie to me." She turned around just enough to catch my eye, her expression unreadable. "I think you should go," she said, her voice almost a whisper now, colder than I'd heard it before. "There's nothing here for you." I stood there for a second, the weight of the situation settling in, before I turned and walked out of the room. This was more than just a missing file. Someone had deliberately hidden it. The problem was, I wasn't sure who. I walked down the narrow hall toward the exit, my mind racing. But just before I reached the door, a voice called out behind me. "Elise?" I turned. Miranda. She was standing by the front desk, her posture rigid and her expression stone cold. She hadn't been in the room when I spoke with the clerk, but there she was now, watching me from a distance. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the quiet. "I'm looking for something," I said, my voice thick with disbelief. "And apparently, it's something you've been hiding from me." Her gaze faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "You should leave it alone. There's nothing here for you. You're better off walking away from all of this." I couldn't believe it. She was telling me to walk away from the truth. I clenched my fists, feeling my nails bite into my palms. "I'm not going anywhere. You can't make me forget." Miranda didn't reply, just gave me one last cold look before turning away. I stood there for a moment longer, staring at the exit, knowing full well that the people I thought I could trust had buried me. And as I stepped out into the cold light of the fading afternoon, I realized something. I wasn't going to get the answers easily. Not from them, not from anyone. This was just the beginning, and I wasn't about to stop now. The evening was dark when I got back to my motel room. I'd only come to Coldhaven for one reason, to bury my mother and leave. But with every step I took, the weight of what I was uncovering seemed to pull me deeper into this suffocating place. I locked the door behind me and threw my bag on the bed, my eyes immediately drawn to the burner phone I'd kept hidden in the small compartment of my suitcase. It was the same phone I'd used when things got ugly before, when I had to communicate with people who couldn't be trusted with my real identity. The same phone I hadn't needed in years, but now felt I should turn to. I picked it up, scrolling through the messages that had come in while I was at the records office. One stood out, an anonymous text that had arrived right after I'd left the building. "You're getting too close. Stop digging. Leave now before it's too late." I stared at it, my fingers gripping the phone tighter than I intended. My heart beat faster, but it wasn't fear that made me tense up. It was adrenaline. Whoever sent this wasn't just warning me. They were trying to intimidate me. I didn't care. I wasn't leaving now. I set the burner phone down and paced around the room for a moment, trying to process everything. The more I thought about the town's cold reception, the more it felt like they were all in on something. Miranda, the people at the records office, they were all part of a story they refused to let me read. They were erasing me, my past, and the work I'd done with that covert treasury division. I couldn't let them. I turned back to the small desk near the window where I'd set my laptop. I had one more thing to do before I made my next move. There was a flash drive I kept tucked away, encrypted and marked with a code only a few people knew. One of those people was Alex Kess, a retired cybercrime investigator who had once mentored me. He'd seen how deep the corruption ran when I'd worked with the Treasury, and though I hadn't spoken to him in years, I trusted him. If anyone could help me crack the data on the encrypted files I'd recovered, it was him. I connected the flash drive to my laptop, scanning the files quickly. There was too much on here to go through manually, but one folder caught my eye: unlisted codenames. I opened it without hesitation, my fingers flying across the keys as I scrolled through metadata and partial project reports. These were the things that hadn't made it to the public record. These were the things that the world didn't know existed. But they would. I found something buried in a file labeled Project Egress. It wasn't much, just a line of code and a few corrupted files. But what was clear was the metadata attached to it. Whoever had been handling this project, whoever had erased it from the records, had left traces behind. I couldn't read everything, but I didn't need to. I took a screenshot of the relevant data and attached it to a message. Then, with a steady hand, I typed the short message. Alex, I need your help. This is bigger than I thought. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. If Alex agreed to help, it would give me the leverage I needed, but it also meant that I was no longer working in the shadows. I set the phone down and grabbed the burner again, scrolling through the numbers. There was one more thing I needed to do, one more conversation I had to have before I went any further. I found Miranda's number and stared at it for a few seconds. There was no way I could keep this from her. She needed to know that I wasn't walking away. I dialed the number. It rang for a while before she picked up, her voice flat as always. Elise? Miranda, I know what you've been hiding. I know what you've been trying to erase. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, just barely. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, a quiet fury building behind my words. And I'm not going to stop. I'm going to make sure the truth comes out. It's not just about Mom anymore, it's about everything. I could almost hear her clenching her teeth. You don't know what you're messing with. I know enough. I know that you've been covering up for years. I know the award that should have been mine is sitting on a shelf with someone else's name on it. And I know you've been helping to erase every part of my life, but I'm not going to let you get away with it. There was a pause, longer this time. The silence between us was thick. Then finally she spoke, her voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what you're getting into. Leave it alone, Elise, for your own good. Too late for that, I replied coldly, my resolve hardening with every word. I've already sent the files, I'm going public. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe? Or maybe just the certainty that this wasn't going to end the way she hoped. You think you're in control? You think you can fix everything by digging into the past? I didn't hesitate. I don't think. I know. I hung up before she could say anything else, setting the phone down with a feeling that I could finally breathe again. This wasn't about protecting anyone anymore. It wasn't about making sure I wasn't seen as the villain. I was done being the scapegoat. I moved to my laptop, fingers flying across the keys as I prepared to upload the files to a secure forum. Financial journalists, watchdog groups, they would be the ones to make this right. If I couldn't get justice in Coldhaven, then I would make sure the world saw the truth. I double-checked everything, ensuring the data was encrypted and secure. Then I clicked the upload button, sending the first batch of files into the ether. My pulse quickened, and for the first time since I'd stepped foot back into this town, I felt like I was finally making a difference. The burner phone buzzed again. Another message from Alex. Got your message. Let's talk. Meet me at the old warehouse. Same time as before. I smiled bitterly. It was time to meet the people who knew the real cost of what I'd been through. The ones who weren't afraid to expose what had been buried for so long. And this time I wasn't walking away, not without answers. The old warehouse was just as I remembered it. Cold, forgotten, and eerily quiet. The place had once been a secret safe house of sorts, a location that could be counted on for whispered deals and hidden truths. Now it was nothing but a crumbling skeleton, a relic from a time long past, its rusting doors and broken windows offering no secrets to anyone who didn't already know where to look. The only light came from a flickering bulb overhead, casting long shadows on the cracked concrete floor. The air smelled of dust and stale machinery, and the faint echo of my footsteps seemed to reverberate through the empty space as I made my way deeper into the warehouse. It was always quiet here. No distractions. No one but me and the people who had been part of the operation. I checked the time on my phone. Alex was late, just like last time. But that was fine. He had always worked on his own schedule. And truth be told, it wasn't like I had anything better to do than wait for him. A few minutes later, the sound of footsteps broke the silence, soft but deliberate. I turned, watching as Alex emerged from the shadows, his long coat trailing behind him, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. He was older now, grayer, and the years had taken their toll. but he still carried the same intensity in his eyes that had made him the mentor I'd once respected. "Elise," he said, his voice gravelly from years of disuse but still commanding. He offered a nod in greeting, his hand going to the back of his neck as he stretched, clearly not used to the cold of the warehouse anymore. "Alex," I replied, my voice flat. "I've got a problem." He raised an eyebrow as he stepped closer, his gaze scanning the room before settling on me. "You always do," he said with a dry chuckle. "So, what's the mess this time?" I didn't waste time. I reached into my bag and pulled out the solid-state drive I'd hidden in my suitcase earlier. It was small, unassuming, but the data on it could change everything. I held it out to him. "I need you to crack this open," I said. "It's all of it. Every bit of data I've been able to salvage. Names, codes, projects, the entire operation." Alex took the drive with a nod, his fingers brushing against mine briefly. He didn't say anything as he inserted it into his laptop, which he'd already set up on a small metal table in the corner. His eyes flicked over the screen as the data began to load. "I thought you were done with all this," he muttered, more to himself than to me as the files appeared. "You know this is dangerous, right?" "I didn't come back for my health," I replied, watching him closely. "I came back for the truth. I need to know what they've been hiding from me, from everyone." He didn't respond at first, just continued scrolling through the files, clicking through documents, his expression unreadable. The only sound was the rapid clicking of his keyboard. I could see the cogs turning in his mind, processing everything as he went deeper into the files. "Someone's been cleaning up," he said after a long pause. "These files are heavily corrupted, but I can make out some of it. Whoever's been covering their tracks is good, really good." "That's why I need you, Alex," I said, stepping closer. "I need you to find out who's been doing this, who's been erasing me, and why." His eyes flicked up at me, his face hardening. "It's not just about you, Elise. You know this." He ran a hand through his graying hair. "These kinds of things don't get buried by one person. They never do." "I know," I said quietly. "But it started with me. It started when they erased my career, my entire existence from the record. And if I can find out who did it, I can find out why. Then I can fix it." Alex closed his laptop slowly, turning his full attention to me. "You really want to go down that rabbit hole, don't you? Even after everything?" I nodded, not blinking. "I didn't come all the way back here for nothing," he sighed, running a hand across his jaw. "You should have left it alone, Elise. You know what happened to people who dug too deep into this stuff, people who didn't walk away." "I'm not walking away." I kept my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "I don't care what happened to the others. I'm not going to be erased." Alex looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He slid the laptop off the table and picked up the solid-state drive. "All right, I'll help you. But you need to know something. This goes way beyond the Treasury, Elise. It's bigger than what you think. Bigger than what you can even imagine." I met his gaze, not flinching. "I've been in the dark long enough. I'm ready for whatever comes next." Alex didn't say anything else. Instead, he opened his laptop again and started typing, his eyes focused on the screen. The flickering light from the bulb above cast shadows on his face as he worked, his hands moving quickly across the keyboard. I stood there, watching, knowing that whatever came next, there would be no turning back. The people who had silenced me, erased me from the records, they were about to find out that I wasn't done with them, and they'd have to answer for what they did. After a few minutes, Alex stopped typing and leaned back in his chair, his face grim. "It's all here," he said softly, his voice laced with tension. "I'm sending the decrypted files to your secure email. But Elise," he paused, his eyes narrowing, "you need to be careful. They'll be coming after you, and not just you." I didn't need to ask who. I already knew. Miranda, the town, everyone I had trusted. "I'm not scared," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure if that was true. "But I'm done hiding." Alex nodded, and I knew in that moment we were both in deeper than either of us had ever been before. As he handed me the drive and I left the warehouse, the weight of everything I was carrying settled on me. This wasn't just about a government cover-up anymore. This was about everything that had been kept from me, and about making them remember my name. It was time to strike back. I sat alone in my motel room, the flickering light of the old computer screen casting long shadows on the walls. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised to make the decision that could either undo everything I had left or set something much bigger into motion. The files Alex had decrypted for me were overwhelming. What had seemed like a series of disconnected documents had, with Alex's help, turned into something much more. Hidden names, code names for people who had been on the inside of the operation, metadata that pointed directly at my family. And the most chilling of all, a hidden ledger that didn't just track money. It tracked power. I had what I needed. The truth. The people who had been behind the cover-ups, behind the false accusations, were all in these files. Names, projects, dates. It was all right there. And with one click, I could send it all out. To the people who could expose it. To the journalists who would tear it apart. But I wasn't just clicking a button. This wasn't just about clearing my name. It wasn't even about exposing the conspiracy. I knew that. What I didn't know was what it would cost me to see this through. I picked up the burner phone once more, scrolling through the list of contacts. There was one person I trusted with this. One person who could help turn these files into something that couldn't be ignored. Lily Tran. She was a local reporter I'd met a few years ago while I was still working for the Treasury. She wasn't just another journalist looking for a story. She was someone who cared. And she had the skills to follow a trail. If I was going to take this public, it had to be with her. I dialed her number, the phone ringing once, twice, then picking up on the third. Elise? Lily's voice was cautious, like she wasn't sure if this was a call she should be answering. I didn't blame her. I had spent years keeping my distance from everyone, and now I was throwing her into something she likely didn't want any part of. But it was too late for that. It's me, I said, trying to keep the tension from seeping into my voice. I have something big, and I need you to help me get it out there. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice sharpening. Elise, last time I heard from you, you were barely talking to me about anything. Now you're calling me about a big story? I've been digging, I explained, keeping it as simple as I could. Into my past. Into the thing that got me erased. I have files. The truth. The truth, she echoed, the skepticism creeping back into her tone. You don't just call up a reporter and say that. What are you talking about? I took a breath, my heart pounding. This wasn't easy to say, even over the phone, but there was no other choice. Remember that covert Treasury division I was part of? I asked. The one that got wiped from existence? The one I was a part of? There was a long silence before she spoke again, her voice a little softer. Yeah, I remember. I just didn't think it was something you'd be willing to talk about. Well, I'm ready to talk about it, I said, my fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. Because the people who covered it up, the people who erased me, they're still out there. And they're still hiding the truth. Hiding everything. I heard the rustling of papers on the other end of the line. Lily was always quick on her feet, her mind sharp when it came to following stories. She wasn't one to drop something once it caught her attention. Send it to me, she said after a moment. All of it. I'll take a look, see what's worth pursuing. You sure? I asked, even though I knew she was already committed. I'd been careful about who I let in. But Lily, she was someone I knew could handle this. She wouldn't back down. She wouldn't let it disappear. I'm sure. Just send it, Elise. I ended the call without another word, quickly pulling up the files I downloaded onto my laptop. I went through them one last time, checking every detail, every name. Then, without hesitation, I attached everything to an encrypted email and sent it to Lily. My stomach twisted as I hit send, but I couldn't afford to hesitate anymore. I had to trust that she would know what to do with it. The email pinged in my inbox moments later, confirming the send. There was no going back now. I sat back in the chair, letting the silence of the room settle over me. The motel was too quiet, the stillness pressing down on me as the gravity of the situation hit. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for what would come next. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from Lily. Got it. I'll look through it tonight. You're not alone in this, Elise. I'll make sure this gets out there. But you need to be prepared. They'll come for us once this goes public. Be ready. I stared at the message for a moment, my chest tight. I had known this was coming, but seeing it in black and white, seeing someone else acknowledge it, made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. I quickly typed a response. I'm ready. And I was. What came next would be a war, but it was a war I was prepared to fight, a war I had no intention of losing. With one final glance at the laptop screen, I closed the lid and stood up. Tomorrow, I would be in the crosshairs. Tomorrow, everything would change. But for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The first signs of trouble came before the sun even rose. I had barely closed my eyes, exhausted from the day's events, when the harsh ring of my phone jolted me awake. I grabbed it off the nightstand, squinting at the screen. It was a private number. My heart skipped a beat. I answered it, my voice rough from sleep. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was cold, clipped, and unmistakable. "You've made a mistake, Elise." It was Miranda. I sat up straight, rubbing my eyes. "What are you talking about? You sent those files? You really think the people behind this are just going to let it go?" Her voice was low, the words calculated, like she had rehearsed them 100 times. "You think that by sending this out, you're doing the right thing? You've just opened Pandora's box, and you've just made everything harder on yourself, on all of us." "Miranda, I did what I had to do," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through me. "You don't get to keep erasing people. You don't get to silence us. I'm not going to pretend anymore that I don't know what's going on." There was a long silence on the other end. "I tried to protect you," she finally said, her voice a little more strained. "But you're too far gone now. And it's not just you. This is bigger than anything you realize. You're going to regret this." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my pulse racing. My first thought was that she was just trying to scare me. But deep down, I knew she was right. What I had just set in motion wasn't going to go unnoticed. I stood up and paced around the room, trying to push away the growing unease in my chest. I had already sent the files out to Lily. There was no taking them back. But it wasn't just the files that had set things into motion. It was me, my return, the things I had uncovered, the truth. The problem was, the people who had covered it up weren't going to let it slide, and I was going to be their first target. I grabbed my coat and made my way to the small desk, checking my burner phone once more. There was a message from Lily. "The files are on the way. I've already reached out to some contacts. Expect things to pick up soon. Be careful, they'll come for us." It was exactly what I had feared. Before I could think about it too much, my phone buzzed again. This time, a number I didn't recognize. I answered it on the first ring, heart hammering in my chest. "Elise Turner?" the voice asked, sharp and official. "Yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "We're with the Department of Finance. You've been identified as a potential risk to national security. We need to speak with you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about? I'm not involved in anything like that. I'm just—" "Do not attempt to contact anyone," the voice interrupted, the cold authority in their tone sending chills down my spine. "We are aware of your recent activities and have taken appropriate measures. You will be contacted again shortly. If you attempt to run or tamper with evidence, we will consider it an act of treason." The line went dead. I stood there frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the situation crushed me. They were watching me, and they weren't going to let me slip away without consequences. The door to my motel room suddenly burst open, and I jumped back, my heart leaping into my throat. But it wasn't who I expected. It was Alex, rushing in with his bag slung over his shoulder. "Elise, we need to go," he said, his voice urgent, his eyes wide with concern. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "They've already been in touch. They know." "I know," he said grimly, dropping his bag on the bed. "I tried to warn you. You've triggered something, and now they are going to make sure it all disappears. Fast." I felt my knees go weak. What do we do now? "First, we get out of here. You need to lay low. They'll be coming for you soon, and they won't care what it costs." I nodded, still in shock, trying to process what was happening. My whole life had just unraveled in front of me. Everything I had worked for, everything I had uncovered, was about to come crashing down. Alex grabbed his jacket and tossed it to me. "Get your things. We're moving fast now. No more playing by the rules." I shoved the phone in my pocket, my mind spinning. "What do you mean? Who are we running from? The government? My family?" "Both," he replied, his voice low. "And anyone else who's part of this conspiracy. You're not just a target anymore. You're a message. And they're going to do everything they can to shut you up." I pulled my bag over my shoulder, not saying another word. What else was there to say? The truth had already been set in motion. There was no going back now. I wasn't just fighting for my own life anymore. I was fighting for the lives of everyone who had been erased, everyone who had been silenced. The truth was out, and now It was time to survive long enough for it to be heard. As Alex led me out of the room, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation settle in. The walls were closing in and I was running out of time. But I was done running from my past. This time, I was going to make them hear me. The high-profile Financial Transparency Conference in DC wasn't a place for people like me. It was for the polished, the elite, the ones who played the game with the right alliances, the right faces. But here I was, standing in the back of the grand hall, trying to gather the courage to walk on stage. I could already feel the weight of the eyes on me, even from the back. I was here on a whim, a desperate gamble after everything had started to spiral out of control. Alex had gotten me the invite, a live-streamed slot, one meant for an anonymous speaker. It was the kind of thing they threw to people they didn't think could cause any real trouble. But I wasn't here to be anonymous. I wasn't here to be the same Elise Turner who had vanished 6 years ago. No. I was here to show them the truth. I had the files, the evidence, the names, and I had already sent the information to Lily, my trusted reporter. It was only a matter of time before the world saw what had been hidden from them. And I was going to be the one to make them listen. The buzz in the room hummed, the chatter rising as panelists and attendees mingled in their neatly pressed suits and designer dresses. The speakers on stage were calm, composed, prepared, and then there was me, not even sure what I was about to say, but knowing it had to be said. Alex found me in the crowd, his face grim, his steps quick. He pulled me aside with a sense of urgency in his voice. "Elise, you're really doing this? Right now? Are you sure?" "I don't have a choice anymore," I said, my voice firm. I had no plan, no carefully crafted speech, but I had the truth. That was all I needed. "Just remember, once you do this, there's no turning back," Alex warned, his eyes searching mine. "I'm not here to turn back, Alex," I replied. "I'm here to make sure they can't bury me again." He hesitated for a moment before nodding, reluctantly, as if he understood the depth of what was about to happen. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Good luck. I didn't need luck. I had everything I needed. The moment I stepped to the side of the stage, a staff member ushered me into a dimly lit hallway behind the curtains. The smell of dry cleaning and fresh coffee lingered in the air. I could feel the hum of electricity in the room beyond, the soft murmurs of the audience awaiting their next speaker. The voice in my earpiece buzzed, signaling that it was time. "You're up in 5, the assistant said quickly before disappearing back into the shadows. 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes to prepare for everything that would come next. I stood at the side of the stage, watching the audience file in and take their seats. They had no idea what was coming. I couldn't show fear. I couldn't show hesitation. And then the announcement came. "Next, we have an anonymous speaker, a whistleblower who has uncovered a hidden financial scandal. Please welcome." The lights dimmed further, and I stepped onto the stage, the harsh spotlight blinding me for a second before my eyes adjusted. The crowd sat in front of me, a sea of faces that ranged from disinterested to curious. I couldn't see them clearly. All I could see was the platform, the microphone, the projector behind me. This was my moment. I didn't wait for the applause. I wasn't here to be celebrated. I was here to tell them something they wouldn't forget. "I'm Elise Turner," I said into the microphone, my voice calm but edged with something harder than I had ever felt before. "I used to work for the U.S. Treasury, not as a lowly accountant, but as part of a forensic accounting team, a team that uncovered financial crimes within the government, a team that was erased." I could hear the audience stir, the whispers starting, but I didn't let them distract me. This wasn't about me. It was about the truth that needed to be heard. For years, I was told I didn't matter, that my work didn't matter. I continued, the words coming easier now. But it did matter, and what's worse, the people who tried to bury me, who erased the work we did, are still out there. They've been covering up crimes, manipulating records, laundering money from recovery funds that should have gone to the people, and they didn't stop with me. The audience grew quieter, some leaning forward. This was it. This was the moment I could change everything. "I've gathered the files, I have the names, the code names for the projects, I have the receipts for the money that was moved around to the wrong pockets," I said, taking a breath. "And I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only one who has been erased. There are others like me, people who have had their careers, their lives stolen from them, and today I'm giving them a voice." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the air. The eyes of the audience were fixed on me now, some skeptical, others intrigued. I knew that it was too late for them to turn back. "I'm about to show you the truth," I said. The financial web of deceit that stretches from the halls of power to the places we were told we could trust. And once this information gets out, it won't be easy to ignore. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the flash drive, holding it up for the audience to see. This contains the records, all of it. I've already sent a portion to journalists who will ensure it's not swept under the rug. I slid the flash drive into the slot on the projector, and the screen behind me came to life. One by one, documents began flashing onto the screen. Names, account numbers, code names, everything. The room went quiet as they scanned the files, the data too overwhelming to ignore. The room was still, the only sound now coming from the projector as it clicked through page after page. I could see the audience's faces shift from curiosity to shock, some even starting to stand up, their phones out, already typing furiously. But I wasn't finished yet. I pulled up the final document, the one that had taken me the longest to find, my mother's name, her signature on a falsified grant request, tied directly to the laundering operation I had uncovered. She had been the mastermind, the one who had pushed everything aside for her political gain. The gasps in the room were audible, and I saw a few people look at each other, whispering in disbelief. I looked directly at the crowd, my eyes sharp, my voice clear. "My mother was not the person you thought she was," I said, letting the weight of those words sink in. "And neither are the people who helped her hide these crimes. They thought they could erase me. They thought they could erase all of us. But they can't. Not anymore." I let the silence linger for a moment, watching the room slowly digest what had just happened. This was the moment. There was no going back. "I'm Elise Turner, and if you can't find your name in their records, make them remember why." With that, I turned and walked off the stage, the room still buzzing with a mix of disbelief, fear, and shock. It wasn't over, but it had begun. The storm hit as soon as I stepped out of the conference hall. Lily had already been texting me before I'd even made it to the parking lot. Her messages were a mix of updates and warnings, each one more urgent than the last. The files were already being verified by major news outlets. It was happening, really happening. But with the adrenaline of the presentation fading, I started to feel the weight of the consequences sink in. The Department of Finance, the people in my town, my family, they would be coming for me. I could already imagine the pressure mounting, the calls, the threats, the smear campaigns, but at least I wasn't hiding anymore. And I was making them all look. I stepped into my car, taking a deep breath. I had one more thing to do before I went into hiding. My phone buzzed again, another unknown number. I hesitated, but answered anyway. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice steady despite the beating of my heart. "Elise Turner?" The voice on the other end was cold, clipped, familiar. "Who's this?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "This is Special Agent Daniels. We need to talk." I didn't even flinch. I'd been expecting this, but hearing it come out of someone's mouth still made the blood drain from my face. "I'm not talking to anyone," I replied, my voice sharp. "Listen," Daniels continued, his voice low, almost calming. "You've made a serious mistake. And now you've put a lot of people in danger. You're not the only one involved here. We can help you, but only if you come clean. If you hand over the files and tell us who else is involved, we can make sure this doesn't end badly for you." "Yeah, that's not happening," I shot back. "You're the ones who have been covering this up for years. You think I'm just going to hand over everything I've worked for so you can bury it again?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear the agent on the other end trying to keep his calm. "I understand this is hard, but I'm offering you a way out." I laughed bitterly. "You're offering me nothing. I've been buried long enough. Now it's your turn." Before he could respond, I hung up. I couldn't waste any more time with them. They weren't interested in helping me. They wanted to control the narrative like they always had. This was bigger than just me now. It was bigger than my career. It was about making sure everyone who had been silenced was finally heard. I dialed Lily again, my hand shaking slightly as I held the phone. "Lily, it's happening. They're going to come after me now, but this isn't over. I need you to keep pushing the story forward. Keep it public." Lily's voice was steady, reassuring. "It's already out there, Elise, and it's spreading fast. They can't cover this up, no matter how hard they try." I exhaled, trying to steady my breath. "Make sure you keep pushing. Make sure you get the whole story, the names, the connections. We need the people who've been in on this for years exposed. They need to pay for what they've done." "I will," Lily said, her voice unwavering. "I won't let them erase us again. I won't let them bury the truth." I hung up, my mind spinning. This was just the beginning, but I couldn't do it alone. I couldn't outrun everything. There were too many people involved, too many people who would do whatever it took to bury this. I needed to prepare for what came next. The days that followed were a blur. The news was picking up steam. First the local outlets, then the national ones. Headlines like "Whistleblower exposes government corruption and secret Treasury division uncovered" ran across every major site, and the weight of it all made my head spin. But amidst the chaos, I felt a strange kind of relief. The truth was out there, it couldn't be ignored anymore. Then the calls came, the ones I had been waiting for. First from Miranda, then from my mother, each one more frantic than the last. I didn't pick up, I couldn't. I had nothing to say to them anymore. But when my father's voice appeared in my inbox, the words he left me were different. His message wasn't the same as their anger. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a demand. It was a plea. "Elise, I don't know what's happened to you, but this isn't the way to fix things. You've made your point. You've uncovered everything. You've shown the world who your mother was, who I was, but it's too much now. Please, you have to stop. For your own sake, for all our sakes, we'll make it right. Just come home." I stared at his words, the guilt gnawing at me. I had been prepared for this, prepared for the anger, but not this, not a desperate cry for help. I deleted the message. I had to keep going. The truth wasn't something you could walk back from, not after everything that had happened, not after everything they had done to me, to us. The world was watching now. There was no turning back. I wasn't done yet, and neither were they. The following week, things escalated. They had always tried to make me the villain, the scapegoat for everything that had gone wrong. But now, as my name began to spread in the headlines, I could see the cracks starting to show in their facade. Miranda resigned from her position at the lobbyist firm she worked for. She hadn't called to apologize, of course, but I knew the weight of what was happening had finally sunk in for her. She was losing control. My mother's name was being dragged through the mud. It didn't matter how many public statements she released. The media had already picked up on her involvement, and there was no escaping it. She had been the mastermind behind much of the financial crimes I had uncovered, and now it was coming back to bite her. And my father? He was next. The quiet accomplice who had let my mother manipulate him. He hadn't been a part of the deeper corruption, but he had turned a blind eye for too long. Everything was unraveling. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just my family that had fallen apart. The entire system I'd been a part of, the one that had buried me, was now falling apart too. Everyone involved would have to face the consequences of their actions, whether they liked it or not. But as I sat in my motel room watching the world outside, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not yet. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. The truth was out, and now it was my turn to make sure the world heard every word. And that was just the beginning. Months had passed since the whirlwind of exposure, the chaos, the betrayals. Since that day at the conference, the world had changed in ways I hadn't fully expected. The hearings, the investigations, the quiet, relentless efforts to clean up the mess that my mother, my sister, and others like them had left behind. The truth had cut through the silence like a knife, and nothing had remained untouched. I had thought that once the files were out there, once I made the world see what had been hidden, I would be finished, that I could walk away. But I couldn't. Not yet. The truth was still reverberating through everything, and there were still so many people out there whose voices hadn't been heard. People who had been silenced, just like I had. I wasn't done until the last name was remembered. It was a rainy morning when I stepped into the conference room, feeling the weight of everything I had learned, everything I had uncovered. This wasn't like the conferences I had attended when I was part of the Treasury, sitting in the back, pretending to be invisible. This time I was at the front. This time I was the one speaking, the one with the story that could change everything. The room was smaller than I expected, the kind of place where new Treasury recruits would gather for their first introductions. It was a quiet, unassuming space. No massive stage, no flashing lights, just a handful of seats, a few notebooks, and a group of eager young analysts ready to start their careers. I wasn't here as an agent, not anymore. I wasn't the Elise Turner who had spent years buried under the weight of a secret life. I was the Elise Turner who had finally stepped into the light, the one who had uncovered everything and refused to be erased. They called me to the front, and I walked with purpose, my heart steady, my mind clear. I wasn't here to make them feel sorry for me. I wasn't here to be anyone's hero. I was here because I had something they needed to understand. something they would learn from. As I stood behind the podium, the sound of the rain tapping gently against the window, I surveyed the room. A sea of young faces, some skeptical, some hopeful, all ready to begin their journeys. I wasn't one of them anymore, but I was here to show them something. Good morning, I said, my voice carrying easily across the room. My name is Elise Turner. I'm here to tell you a story of how the system can fail, how the truth can be buried, how people like me can be erased. But more importantly, I'm here to tell you how it can all be fixed. The room fell into an expectant silence. A few people exchanged glances, unsure of what they were about to hear. But I didn't hesitate. I wasn't going to sugarcoat it for them. They needed to know the truth, the whole truth. I used to work for the Treasury in a division that was supposed to investigate corruption and financial crimes. We uncovered massive discrepancies, billions of dollars being funneled into the wrong hands. But when it came time to expose it, they erased us. They erased me. My work, my identity, everything was wiped out. I wasn't the only one. I could see a few of them shifting in their seats, a sense of curiosity beginning to rise. I'm here today because I want to make sure that no one here ever has to face that kind of erasure. I want to make sure that the people you meet in your career, the ones who come to you with their stories, their truths, that you listen to them, you do your job. You make sure the truth is always protected, and when the truth gets buried, you bring it to the surface. I paused, letting the words settle. It's not just about protecting the system, it's about protecting the people. You may be told that your job is just numbers, just reports, just audits, but what you're really doing is protecting the integrity of everything, the people's trust. And when that gets broken, when those who are supposed to protect it exploit it, you have to fight to bring it back. I saw a few of them nodding, others were still skeptical, but I could feel the shift. They were listening. They were beginning to understand. Here's the thing, I said, my tone softening just a little. I'm not here to tell you that you should always follow the rules. Sometimes, the rules need to be broken. But the most important thing I want you to remember is this. When you find something, when you uncover something that's wrong, you have to speak up. You can't stay silent. You can't let fear keep you from doing what's right. I leaned forward, looking each of them in the eye. Because if you do, you might wake up one day and find that your name has been erased, that everything you worked for, everything you believed in was buried. I stood back, taking a deep breath. So when you're here and you're faced with your first hard decision, your first real test, remember this moment. Remember that your integrity is the one thing they can't take from you. Don't let them erase you. Don't let them erase anyone. I could feel the weight of the room shift. The eyes on me suddenly filled with something different. Respect. Maybe even understanding. It wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about making my story known. It was about them. About making sure they wouldn't be the next ones silenced. I took a step back, the silence stretching for a few moments before the first young woman stood up, clapping softly. Slowly, the others joined in. The applause wasn't loud, but it was genuine. I hadn't come here for praise. But hearing it, knowing that my story had somehow made a difference, that the truth had found a new home in the hearts of those who would protect it, it meant more than any of them would ever understand. I walked out of the room with a sense of purpose. I was done fighting for my own name. It was already remembered. But now I had a new role. I was here to make sure no one else was ever erased again. I was no longer a whistleblower. I was a mentor, a guardian of truth, and the new chapter of my life had only just begun.